You think a platinum card is a license to shatter a person's spirit? You are catastrophically mistaken. Meet Clara, an art history graduate student whose life was a delicate tapestry woven with threads of mounting debt and quiet desperation. She poured wine at night so she could study the brushstrokes of Renaissance masters by day, all to keep a roof over her ailing grandmother's head. She believed her night was already in ruins when 3 men, reeking of new money and old arrogance, took the best table in her section. They built a bill that could have paid her rent for a year, only to orchestrate a cruel lie to avoid paying a dime. They were convinced of their own invincibility, blind to the world beyond their own reflections, but they failed to notice the solitary, silver-haired man in the corner booth, a man nursing a single glass of scotch, a man who didn't just own the restaurant, he owned the very auction houses and galleries that defined the world these men so desperately wanted to conquer. The karmic retribution that unfolds is not just instant, it is exquisite. Let's begin. The revolving doors of the Gilded Lyre whispered shut, sealing out the damp chill of a New York City evening and encasing Clara Miller in an atmosphere of hushed opulence. It was 9 p.m. on a Tuesday, a night that should have been slow, but the air was thick with the scent of seared scallops, expensive perfume, and the kind of generational wealth that felt like a physical pressure. Clara hated Tuesdays. They were unpredictable. She smoothed the front of her starched black apron, catching a glimpse of herself in the polished bronze of a nearby wine cooler. The circles under her eyes were a testament to a night spent researching Flemish portraiture, but a careful application of concealer hid the worst of it. Her grandmother's nursing home had sent another letter that morning, a polite but firm reminder that the bill was 60 days past due. She needed this job. More than that, she needed the kind of tips that only came from tables that ordered the grand seafood tower without looking at the price. "Clara, you're on table 12, Marcus, the floor manager, hissed as he swept by, his face a mask of strained hospitality. The Thorne party. Julian Thorne. Tech money. Trying to act like old money. They're demanding. Smile, be invisible, and for the love of God, don't spill anything." Clara nodded, her hand tightening on her corkscrew. She took a fortifying breath and looked towards table 12. It was the restaurant's crown jewel, a circular booth upholstered in deep velvet, nestled in an alcove that offered both privacy and a commanding view of the entire dining room. The 3 men were settling in, their movements loud and proprietary. Leading the trio was Julian Thorne. He had the sharp, aggressive good looks of a man who had never been told no, his dark hair styled into a severe, wet look. His suit was a shade of blue, so dark it was almost black, tailored with a precision that screamed of thousands of dollars. Flanking him were his 2 acolytes, a beefy, red-faced man named Greg, who was already laughing too loudly at something Julian had said, and a younger, leaner man, Liam, whose eyes darted around the room, cataloguing the wealth of the other patrons with a nervous energy. They hadn't waited for the hostess. They had simply pointed at the booth and claimed it. Clara approached, her order pad held like a shield. "Good evening, gentlemen. Welcome to the Gilded Lyre. My name is Clara, and I'll be your server this evening. May I begin with some water for the table?" Julian didn't look up. He was busy swiping through his phone. He flicked a dismissive hand. "Don't ask questions you should already know the answer to. Still water. From the Italian Alps, not the Norwegian glacier. And make sure the bottles are chilled, but the glasses are room temperature. Condensation on the outside of the glass is an unforgivable aesthetic failure." Greg guffawed. "Hear that, Liam? Aesthetic failure. Julian's a connoisseur of everything." "I'm not a connoisseur," Julian corrected without a trace of irony, finally looking up at Clara. His eyes were a flat, cold grey. I am a standard. Get the water." "Of course, sir," Clara said, her voice a carefully modulated instrument of professional calm. Her heart, however, was a frantic drum against her ribs. "And the wine list," Liam piped up, eager to contribute. "Bring us the heaviest one you have. I want to feel the history in the leather binding." They all chuckled at that. It was a brittle, self-congratulatory sound that seemed to suck the warmth from the air. Clara turned, her cheeks hot. She moved with practiced efficiency towards the service bar, her path taking her past table 7, a small two-person table tucked away in a discreet corner near the grand fireplace. A single man sat there, nursing a glass of what looked like Macallan 25. He was older, perhaps in his late 70s, with a shock of silver hair and a face etched with the kind of fine lines that spoke of both laughter and sorrow. He wore a simple, dark grey suit that was impeccably tailored, but utterly devoid of flash. He was reading a thin volume of poetry, and in front of him lay a small, worn, leather-bound journal. He looked up as Clara passed, and his eyes, a startlingly clear blue, met hers for a fraction of a second. There was a flicker of something in them, empathy, perhaps, or just weary recognition. He gave a minuscule, almost imperceptible nod before returning to his book. Clara felt a strange sense of calm from the brief exchange. He was just a quiet old man having a drink, but his stillness was a comforting anchor in the turbulent sea of Julian Thorne's ego. She didn't know it yet, but that quiet old man was Silas Blackwood, and his quiet observation was about to change the course of her entire life. She returned to table 12, balancing the heavy water bottles and the even heavier wine list. She performed the water service with the precision of a surgeon, pouring a slow, steady stream into the first glass. "Too slow," Julian snapped, not looking up from his phone. "At this rate, we'll be hydrated by Thursday. Pick up the pace." Clara blinked, then moved to the next glass, pouring slightly faster. "Too fast," he barked, finally putting his phone down. "You're agitating the mineral content. It's like you've never done this before. Are you new?" "I've been a server for 6 years, sir," Clara replied, her voice tight. "Well, 6 years of practice haven't resulted in perfection, have they?" He smirked at his friends. "Let's just hope you're better with wine." He snatched the wine list from her hands. It was a massive tome, weighing at least 10 pounds. He flipped through it dramatically, dismissing entire pages with a wave. "Bordeaux is so predictable. Burgundy is for bankers. Let's do something interesting." He finally stabbed a finger at a page. "The 82 Petrus, and don't you dare decant it at the service station. I want to see the sediment. I want to watch you perform the ritual at the table." Clara's blood ran cold. The 82 Petrus. It was one of the most expensive bottles in their cellar. It cost more than a semester of her graduate program. "An excellent choice, sir," she managed to say. "Just get through the night," she told herself. "Just smile and survive." By 10:15 p.m., the bill for table 12 had ballooned to over $7,000. They had ordered 3 appetizers each, sending one back because the microgreens were limp with existential dread. They had ordered the dry-aged tomahawk steaks, complaining that the char was too aggressive, then proceeding to eat every last bite. Clara felt like she was running a gauntlet. Each trip to the table was a new test of her patience. "My fork," Greg announced, letting his silverware clatter to the floor. "It seems to have committed suicide." Clara bent to retrieve it. "Whoa, stop," Julian commanded, holding up a hand. "Don't touch it with your bare hands. We don't know what's on this floor. Go and get one of those little magnetic grabber things. And sterilize the new fork with hot water before you bring it here." Clara straightened up, her jaw clenched. "Sir, we don't have magnetic grabbers. I can assure you the new fork will be perfectly clean. Are you refusing a customer's request?" Julian's voice turned silky and dangerous. "Marcus!" he called out, and the manager appeared at his elbow in an instant, bowing slightly. "Is there a problem, Mr. Thorne?" "Your waitress is being obstinate," Julian said, gesturing at Clara. "A simple request for a sanitized utensil, and she's arguing with me. It's a basic matter of hygiene." Marcus turned his cold, reptilian gaze on Clara. "Do as the gentleman asks. Go to the kitchen, get a new fork, and pour boiling water over it in front of him if you must. Do not argue." The humiliation was a physical thing, a hot, coiling serpent in her gut. She walked to the kitchen, her steps stiff. As she passed Silas Blackwood's table, he looked up from his book again. This time he didn't just nod. He spoke, his voice a low, gravelly baritone. "The lion doesn't concern himself with the opinion of the sheep," he said quietly, not looking directly at her, but at the fireplace. Clara paused. "I'm sorry?" "It's a quote," he said, finally turning his blue eyes to her. "A reminder. Don't let them see the bite." He then returned to his book, as if the conversation had never happened. The strange encouragement, cryptic as it was, gave her a sliver of strength. She performed the ridiculous ritual with the fork and the boiling water, her face an impassive mask. Julian and his friends watched with amusement, as if she were a trained monkey performing a trick. "See? That wasn't so hard," Julian said, patronizingly. "Now, for our main event. We're celebrating a deal, a very, very big deal, and for that, we need a trophy." He leaned forward, his voice dropping conspiratorially. "We want to buy a piece of the art off your walls." Clara froze. "Sir, the art is part of the restaurant's collection. It's not for sale." "Everything is for sale," Julian countered, pointing to a small dark painting hanging in the alcove above their booth. It was an oil-on-wood panel, a 17th-century Dutch still life of a half-peeled lemon and a silver goblet. "That one. It's moody. I like it." "Find out the price." "Sir, I can assure you." "Are you arguing again?" he cut in. "Go ask your manager. Tell him Julian Thorne wants to buy his painting. Tell him to name a price, a high one. I'm feeling generous." Clara retreated, feeling the eyes of the entire dining room on her. She went to Marcus, who was hovering near the hostess stand. "He wants to buy the Van Aelst painting," she whispered, the words feeling absurd on her tongue. Marcus's eyes widened, then a greedy glint appeared. The still life? Did he say how much he'd pay? He just said to name a price. Okay, Marcus said, rubbing his hands together. "Go back and tell him. Tell him it's a cherished piece of the owner's private collection. But for him, we could be persuaded to part with it for $50,000. Clara's stomach lurched. 50,000. For a painting that was, at best, a minor work. But what struck her more was the name of the artist. She had studied him. Jan van Aelst. Something about the painting had always bothered her. The way the light hit the lemon peel was just wrong. The chiaroscuro was too dramatic, more Italian than Dutch. A flicker of an old lecture, a slide of a known forger's work, flashed in her mind. She walked back to the table. "Mr. Thorne, my manager has conferred. The price for the painting is $50,000. Julian threw his head back and laughed. "Perfect. We'll take it. Add it to the bill. We're buying art, boys." As the night wore on, their behavior devolved. They grew louder, more obnoxious. At one point, Julian stood on the velvet seat of the booth to propose a toast, nearly knocking over a tray of glasses from a passing busboy. They demanded dessert, then sent it back, claiming the chocolate had been insufficiently tempered. Finally, at nearly midnight, the restaurant was emptying out. Clara approached the table with the final bill, nestled in a leather folio. The total was staggering. $58,340, including the absurd price of the painting. She placed it on the table. "The final reckoning," she said, her voice a flat monotone. Julian opened the folio. He stared at the total, and a slow, cruel smile spread across his face. He looked at Greg, then at Liam. It was a look of shared conspiracy. He reached into his breast pocket and slowly withdrew a fountain pen. It was an exquisite object, crafted from gleaming black resin and sterling silver, with a gold nib. He fiddled with it for a moment. Then his eyes narrowed on Clara. "You know," he said, his voice dangerously calm, "we've had a long night. We've been entertained by your service. We've been fed. We've even purchased some art." He paused, tapping the pen on the table. "But something feels off. I feel taken advantage of." Clara's blood ran cold. "Sir, the bill is an accurate reflection of everything you ordered." "Oh, I'm not talking about the bill," he said, his eyes glinting. He suddenly stood up, his chair scraping loudly on the floor. "My pen!" he shouted, his voice echoing in the nearly empty restaurant. "My custom-made Mont Blanc. It was right here on the table. Now it's gone." He turned and pointed a trembling, accusatory finger at Clara. You were just here. You were the only one close enough. You stole my pen." The accusation hung in the air, thick and poisonous. Marcus came rushing over, his face pale with panic. "What's going on, Mr. Thorne? Please keep your voice down." "Keep my voice down?" Julian roared. "Your waitress is a thief. That pen was a one-of-a-kind gift from a sheikh. It's worth more than her entire life. I want you to search her. I want you to call the police, now!" Clara felt the floor drop out from beneath her. "I didn't take anything," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I would never." "That's what they all say," Greg sneered, standing up to loom beside Julian. "Probably has it hidden in her apron." Marcus looked from Julian's furious face to Clara's terrified one. He didn't hesitate. He saw a tech millionaire on one side and a disposable waitress on the other. The calculation was simple. "Clara, turn out your pockets," Marcus commanded, his voice devoid of any warmth. "Mr. Marcus, I swear. Now, Clara, or do I have security do it for you?" Tears of rage and humiliation pricked at her eyes. This couldn't be happening. She was being framed, and no one would believe her. She thought of her grandmother, of the eviction notice that would surely follow if she was arrested. Her world was crumbling. Slowly she began to reach for the ties of her apron. She was trapped. From the corner table, Silas Blackwood put down his book. He had been watching the entire spectacle, his face unreadable. He slowly took a sip of his scotch, the ice clinking softly in the glass. It was the only sound in the dead silent room. He placed the glass down with a quiet, deliberate click. He picked up his small leather journal and a pen of his own. A simple, elegant silver one. He made a small note. Then he cleared his throat. It wasn't a loud sound, but it cut through the tension like a razor. "Before you call the police," Silas Blackwood said, his voice calm and resonant, "perhaps the young lady should be allowed to describe the pen she allegedly stole." Julian whirled around, his face contorted with rage. "And who the hell are you? The restaurant critic? Mind your own damn business, old man, before you get hurt." Silas didn't flinch. He simply looked at Julian with his piercing blue eyes. "Humor me," he said. "If she stole it, she must have seen it. Let her describe it. In detail." The silence in the gilded lyre was absolute, a thick, suffocating blanket of tension. Every eye was on the confrontation unfolding in the center of the room, the enraged tech millionaire, the terrified waitress, the spineless manager, and the mysterious old man in the corner. Julian Thorne stared at Silas Blackwood, a sneer twisting his lips. You want her to describe it? Fine. This will be hilarious. Go on, waitress. He spat at Clara, his voice dripping with venom. Describe the pen you have tucked away in your pocket. Let's hear the lies. Clara stood frozen, her heart hammering against her ribs. Her mind was a whirlwind of panic. But then, through the fear, the old man's words echoed. The lion doesn't concern himself with the opinion of the sheep. And something else surfaced, the ingrained habit of 1,000 hours spent in museums and archives, the habit of observation. She had noticed the pen earlier, when Julian had been signing a receipt for another purchase on his phone. She hadn't just seen it. She had analyzed it. It was an involuntary reflex, the way a musician hears the individual notes in a chord. She took a deep, shaky breath, her eyes leaving Julian's face and focusing on a point on the far wall, as if summoning an image from memory. It's not a standard Mont Blanc, she began, her voice quiet but clear. It's from their high artistry collection, a limited edition, the homage to Hannibal Barker. The body is matte black resin, but the cap and fittings are solid white gold, not silver. Julian's sneer faltered slightly. He exchanged a quick, uncertain glance with Greg. Clara continued, her voice gaining confidence as the details flowed. The clip is shaped like a Carthaginian dagger, and at the top, there's a small, brilliant-cut sapphire set into the emblem. The nib is 18-karat gold, engraved with a palm tree, a symbol of Carthage. But it's the main feature that's most distinct. She paused, locking her eyes with Julian's. The cap is overlaid with a white gold lattice, designed to look like a battle shield. And set within that lattice are tiny, almost invisible grey diamonds, meant to represent the coat of an elephant. She took a step closer. But there's a flaw, a tiny one. On the underside of the clip, where it meets the cap, there's a minuscule scratch in the gold, almost imperceptible. It looks like the tool slipped during the final polishing. The entire room was silent. Clara's description had been so precise, so impossibly detailed, that it defied belief. She couldn't have known that from a glance. Marcus stared at her, his mouth agape. Julian's face had gone from red with rage to a pasty, sickly white. How could you possibly know that? He stammered, the accusation in his voice replaced by sheer disbelief. I study art history, Clara said simply. My focus is on identifying forgeries and authenticating rare objects. I notice details. It's what I do. From the corner, Silas Blackwood spoke again, his voice cutting through the stunned silence. An impressive description. Mr. Thorne, since you are the owner of this rare object, you must surely be aware of this manufacturing flaw, the tiny scratch. Can you confirm its location for us? All eyes turned to Julian. He was trapped. If he said yes, it would lend credence to Clara's impossible knowledge. If he said no, he would be contradicting her detailed, confident account. He opened his mouth, then closed it. He was sweating now, beads of moisture dotting his forehead. This is ridiculous, he finally blustered. She's making it up. She must have read about it online. She's a con artist, not a waitress. A con artist who happens to work at this specific restaurant on this specific night when you happen to lose your pen, Silas said, his voice laced with a gentle, lethal skepticism. He slowly stood up. He wasn't a large man, but he moved with an unhurried grace that commanded attention. He walked from the shadows of his corner into the brighter light of the main dining room. Mr. Marcus, Silas said, his gaze falling on the manager, who flinched as if struck. My name is Silas Blackwood. The name meant nothing to Julian or his friends, but Marcus the manager went rigid. His eyes widened in horror and recognition. Every high-end restaurateur in New York knew that name. Silas Blackwood was a legend, a phantom, a billionaire recluse who had built an empire in finance and art acquisition. And, as Marcus knew, with a sudden, sickening certainty, he was the ultimate owner of the holding company that possessed the Gilded Lyre. Mr. Blackwood, Marcus stammered, his face draining of all color. I had no idea you were here, sir. You would have put on a better show? Silas finished, his voice turning to ice. I prefer the truth, and the truth I have witnessed tonight is a disgrace. He turned his attention back to Julian, who was still trying to project an air of blustering authority. I don't care who you are, old man, Julian said, though his voice was a few octaves higher than before. This woman is a thief, and I demand— You demand nothing, Silas interrupted, his voice a low growl. He pulled out his phone, tapped the screen a few times, and then looked at Julian. Your name is Julian Thorne, founder of a tech startup called Innovate, which you funded with the sale of your father's shipping company. You've been trying to get a foothold in the art market, making splashy, overpriced purchases at auction to build a reputation. You bought a Basquiat last month for 40% over its estimated value. Am I correct? Julian was stunned into silence. I know this, Silas continued, taking a step closer, because my firm underwrote the insurance on that painting. I know every detail of your finances, Mr. Thorne. I know that your company is bleeding money. I know your leverage to the hilt. And I suspect that you orchestrated this little drama tonight for one of two reasons. Either to fraudulently claim the insurance on your ludicrously expensive pen, or more pathetically, to simply get out of paying your dinner bill. He let the accusation hang in the air. Then he turned to the remaining staff who were watching from the wings. Call security, not the police, my personal security. He then looked directly at Julian, his blue eyes as hard and cold as diamonds. We are going to settle this. Right now, you will turn out your pockets. If the pen is not there, I will personally apologize and pay for your meal. But if it is— He let the sentence hang, the unspoken threat more powerful than any shout. Julian's bravado finally shattered. The mask of arrogance crumbled, revealing the terrified, cornered fraud beneath. He looked at his friends for support, but they were already backing away, trying to disassociate themselves from the impending disaster. My coat, Julian mumbled, pointing to the cloakroom. It must be in my coat. I must have left it there. Then let's all go and look, shall we? Silas said, his voice dangerously pleasant. He gestured for Julian to lead the way. The walk to the cloakroom was a walk of shame. Julian moved like a man on his way to the gallows. Silas followed, calm and implacable. Marcus scurried behind them, wringing his hands. Clara stood alone by the table, her body trembling with the aftermath of adrenaline. The cloakroom attendant, a young woman named Maria, retrieved Julian's expensive cashmere coat. Check the pockets, Mr. Thorne, Silas commanded. With a shaking hand, Julian reached into the breast pocket of his coat. His fingers closed around something hard and cylindrical. He pulled it out. It was the Mont Blanc pen. A collective gasp went through the small group. Julian stared at the pen in his hand as if it were a venomous snake. I don't understand. It must have fallen in there. Of course it did, Silas said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. He turned to his head of security, a large, stone-faced man who had appeared as if from nowhere. Mr. Thorne and his friends will be paying their bill, all of it. including the $50,000 painting he so generously offered to buy. "$50,000 for that?" Julian squawked, his desperation making him foolish. "That's robbery. It's a fake." Silas's eyebrows shot up. He turned to Clara. "A fake? Is that what he said?" Clara, who had followed them to the cloakroom, found her voice. "Yes, sir. I believe it is. It's a very good copy, likely from the workshop of a known forger named Elias Van Doorn, active in the early 20th century. But the brushwork is too fluid for Van Elst, and the depiction of light is anachronistic." Silas looked from Clara to Julian, and a slow, cold smile spread across his face. "So, not only did you try to frame my waitress for theft to get out of your bill, but you also tried to bully my manager into selling you a painting that you believed to be a fake, likely so you could expose it later and humiliate the restaurant. You, Mr. Thorne, are not a wolf. You are simply a weasel in a very expensive suit." He turned to his security head. "Escort these gentlemen to the front desk. They will pay their bill in full. Then, inform them that their memberships at every club I have a stake in, which is all of them, are revoked. Their credit lines with my banks are frozen as of this moment. And a full account of this evening's events, including Miss Miller's brilliant authentication of the forgery, will be sent to the acquisitions editor at the New York Times art section. I believe they'll find it a very compelling story about the standards of our city's newest collectors." He looked at Julian one last time. "You wanted to make a name for yourself in the art world, Mr. Thorne. Congratulations. As of tomorrow morning, you will be infamous." The heavy mahogany door of the Gilded Lyre swung shut, swallowing Julian Thorne and his disgraced companions into the indifferent New York night. The silence they left behind was profound, broken only by the distant wail of a siren and the frantic, shallow breathing of Marcus, the manager. Silas Blackwood stood in the grand foyer, his posture radiating a quiet, absolute authority. He turned his piercing blue gaze from the door to the manager. Marcus, who had been a model of obsequious panic, was now attempting to rearrange his features into a look of professional control, a feat he failed at spectacularly. A sheen of cold sweat glistened on his forehead. "Mr. Blackwood," Marcus began, his voice cracking. "Sir, I can't apologize enough. This is an unprecedented, a deeply regrettable—" "Stop," Silas said. His voice wasn't loud, but it had the density of a collapsing star. Marcus's mouth snapped shut. "Do not apologize for them. Apologize for yourself." "Sir," Marcus squeaked, his confusion palpable. "I sat at table 7 for 3 hours tonight," Silas said, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. He began to walk slowly back into the dining room, forcing Marcus to walk backwards in front of him. "I come here once a month. I sit at that same table. It was my late wife's favorite. I come here to remember her. And tonight I was forced to watch a grotesque parody of everything she loved about this place." He gestured around the opulent room. She loved the quiet dignity, the seamless service, the idea that for a few hours anyone who walked through these doors was treated with grace. Tonight, I saw none of that. I saw you, Mr. Marcus, scuttling around that table of thugs like a frightened crab, your only concern placating the biggest wallet in the room. "I was trying to de-escalate a difficult situation, sir," Marcus protested, his voice rising in desperation. "Protecting the restaurant's interests." "You have no idea what this restaurant's interests are," Silas retorted, his voice slicing through the manager's defense. "You think its interests are a single, inflated dinner bill? You think it's the good opinion of a charlatan like Julian Thorne? The primary interest of any establishment I own is the well-being and dignity of its staff. They are the engine. They are the heart. You are merely the oil, meant to keep things running smoothly. But tonight, you poured sand in the gears. He stopped directly in front of Marcus, who was now backed against the edge of the now cleared table 12. You did not de-escalate. You escalated. You saw a young woman, one of your own people, being bullied, humiliated, and then falsely accused of a crime. And what did you do? Did you defend her? Did you ask for her side of the story? Did you use your authority to shield her? No. You threw her to the wolves. You demanded she empty her pockets. You became their accomplice. Silas pointed a stern finger at Clara, who was standing near the service station, watching the scene unfold with wide, stunned eyes. Her name is Clara. Did you even know that she is a postgraduate scholar? That she possesses a mind sharp enough to dismantle that fraud's entire scheme with a few sentences? Or to you, was she just the waitress, an anonymous, interchangeable part? Marcus opened his mouth, but no words came out. He was utterly defeated. A leader protects his team, Silas said, his voice dropping to a near whisper that was somehow more menacing than a shout. You, sir, are not a leader. You are a liability. As of this moment, your employment is terminated. Collect your personal effects from your office. My head of security will escort you out. You will receive 2 weeks' severance, which is more courtesy than you showed your own employee. Marcus stared, his face a mask of disbelief. But my career, I've been in this business for 20 years. Then you should have learned something by now, Silas said with finality. He turned his back on the now former manager, a clear dismissal. Good night, Marcus. Defeated, Marcus hung his head and shuffled towards the back offices, a ghost in his own former kingdom. The remaining staff, who had been watching from the shadows, seemed to let out a collective, silent sigh of relief. The oppressive atmosphere had finally lifted. Silas Blackwood's demeanor softened as he turned his full attention to Clara. The titan of industry vanished, replaced by the quiet, observant man from the corner table. He walked over to her, his steps measured and gentle. Miss Miller, he said, his voice now imbued with a surprising kindness. Are you all right? Clara could only nod, her throat too tight for words. The adrenaline that had sustained her was draining away, leaving a profound, bone-deep exhaustion in its wake. You're not fired, are you? She whispered, the question sounding foolish even to her own ears. I really need this job. A sad, gentle smile touched Silas's lips. Fired? My dear young woman, after that performance, I'm considering making you a partner. He gestured to the now vacant table 12. You handled a situation your manager was too cowardly to face. You used your intellect as a weapon and a shield. You were magnificent. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small, alligator skin wallet. From it, he produced a business card. It was thick, cream-colored cardstock, bearing only a name, a private phone number, and a single embossed gold lyre, the symbol of his personal holding company. That was not a random guess about the painting, was it? He asked. You truly knew it was a forgery. I was almost certain, Clara admitted. The provenance of the restaurant's collection is spotty. That piece always felt wrong. Too much emotion for a 17th century Dutch Protestant artist. Silas nodded, a look of deep respect in his eyes. My wife, Eleanor, used to say the same thing. She was a collector. A brilliant one. She bought that painting at a minor auction years ago, knowing it was a fake. She called it her perfectly charming fraud. She kept it as a reminder that even in art, things are not always what they seem. He paused, a shadow of grief passing over his features. She would have liked you very much. The personal revelation hung in the air, a moment of profound, unexpected connection. "The bill for that table," Silas said, his tone becoming more businesslike, "was paid in full, including a mandatory 50% gratuity for emotional distress. It belongs to you." Clara's eyes widened. A 50% tip on a nearly $60,000 bill was life-changing money. It was more than she made in 6 months. "Sir, I can't possibly accept that." "You can and you will," Silas stated firmly. "Consider it a consulting fee for services rendered, 1 art authentication and 1 ego demolition." He placed the business card on the clean surface of a nearby table. "But I have a better offer. That money will solve your problems for a few months. I'm interested in solving them for a lifetime." He looked at her, his gaze serious. "The Blackwood Foundation manages one of the largest private art collections in the country. Since my wife's passing, our acquisitions department has been dormant." The heavy glass door of the Gilded Lyre whispered shut, not with the finality of an ending, but with the hushed intake of breath before a new beginning. Clara stood alone in the cavernous dining room, the ghost of Julian Thorne's spectacular implosion still hanging in the air like acrid smoke. The business card in her hand was a tangible anchor in the swirling vortex of the last hour. It felt warm from her grip, the embossed gold lyre a tiny, sharp promise against her palm. She looked at the table where her life had almost been dismantled. Table 12, now just a circle of velvet and polished wood, wiped clean of its recent ugliness. It was no longer a monument to her humiliation, but a testament to her survival. She walked through the silent restaurant, her footsteps echoing in a way they never had during the frantic choreography of service. She passed table 7, where Silas Blackwood had sat, a quiet sentinel. She could almost see the impression of him there, a man who saw not a waitress, but a person worth defending. The weight of that simple act of recognition was heavier, more profound, than the life-altering job offer. He hadn't saved her because she was a brilliant art historian trapped in an apron. He had saved her because she was a human being treated inhumanely. The rest was just a fortunate discovery. The journey home on the subway was a surreal passage between worlds. The familiar screech of the train's wheels, the smell of damp wool and street food, the weary faces of her fellow passengers. It was the same world she had inhabited 3 hours ago, yet she felt like a foreigner in it. She clutched the strap above her head, the business card tucked safely in her pocket, a secret sun warming her hip. She kept replaying the events, not with the panic of a victim, but with the analytical detachment of a scholar examining a historical event. The arrogance of Thorne, the cravenness of Marcus, the impossible, crystalline precision of her own memory under pressure, and the quiet, unshakable power of Silas Blackwood. He had moved not with the bluster of new money, but with the gravitational pull of old, deep certainty. He didn't need to shout. The world simply bent to his will. When she finally reached her apartment, a 5th-floor walk-up with peeling paint and a view of a brick wall, the contrast was jarring. The air was thick with the scent of her grandmother's lavender sachets, a scent meant to soothe, but which tonight only highlighted the fragility of their existence. The second overdue notice from the nursing home was still on the small kitchen table, a white paper dragon waiting to breathe fire on her life. She picked it up, its threats of collection agencies and removal suddenly seeming pathetic, a paper tiger from a former life. For the first time in years, the knot of financial dread that lived permanently in her stomach began to loosen its grip. It didn't vanish, but it unfurled, allowing her to take a full, deep breath that seemed to reach the very bottom of her lungs. She didn't sleep. Instead, she sat by the window, watching the pre-dawn light slowly turn the brick wall from black to grey, to a soft, rosy pink. She was not thinking of the salary, or the prestige, or the escape from her crushing debt. She was thinking of the Van Elst forgery. She was thinking of the way Silas Blackwood had spoken of his late wife, Eleanor. She would have liked you very much. That single sentence had unlocked something within her. He wasn't just offering her a job. He was offering her a place in a lineage, a spiritual succession. He was asking her to help guard a legacy of passion, a flame his wife had kindled. The responsibility of it was terrifying and more exhilarating than any amount of money. The first 6 months at the Blackwood Foundation were an exercise in controlled vertigo. Clara felt a constant, humming imposter syndrome, a belief that at any moment someone would tap her on the shoulder and ask her what she was doing there. Her wardrobe, hastily assembled from a consignment shop, felt like a costume next to the quiet, bespoke elegance of her colleagues. The hushed, art-lined hallways, the scent of old books and floor wax, the sheer, crushing value of the objects she now handled daily. It was an atmosphere designed to intimidate. But Silas had been clever. He didn't throw her into the deep end of acquisitions or gallery politics. He gave her a singular, monumental task. He led her down into the sub-basement archives to a section known informally as Eleanor's Folly. It was a vast, climate-controlled room, filled not with masterpieces, but with hundreds of pieces Eleanor Blackwood had acquired over 50 years, minor works, unattributed sketches, beautiful forgeries, and objects of pure, sentimental value. It was a collection catalogued not by artist or period, but by emotion and curiosity. Your predecessor tried to organize this by the Dewey Decimal System, Silas told her, a wry smile playing on his lips. He lasted 3 weeks. Eleanor's system was intuitive. She kept a set of journals. He pointed to a shelf of worn, leather-bound books, the same kind he'd had at the restaurant. Your job is not to catalogue the art. It is to catalogue her mind. I want you to read her journals, understand her eye, and create a complete provenance for this collection. Not just where the art came from, but why it's here. I want to understand my wife's heart again. Can you do that? It was a test, she knew, a test of intellect, of empathy, of patience. It was also a gift. For months, Clara immersed herself in Eleanor Blackwood's world. She sat at a large oak table, surrounded by forgotten art, and read. She deciphered the elegant, looping script that chronicled 50 years of auctions, studio visits, and quiet contemplation. Eleanor was brilliant, witty, and possessed an almost supernatural eye for the human story behind each object. She bought a drab 18th-century portrait of a merchant, not for its artistic merit, but because, as she wrote, the artist has perfectly captured the man's terror of being forgotten. She acquired a set of chipped porcelain cups because they were from a factory that had employed women for the first time in its region. Clara wasn't just learning about art. She was learning about a way of seeing. She began to understand that a collection wasn't an assembly of assets. It was a biography written in objects. She compiled her findings not in a spreadsheet, but in a narrative, cross-referencing journal entries with the art, telling the story of each piece's journey into Eleanor's care. She found her own voice in the process, her academic rigor blending with a newfound appreciation for the emotional weight of art. She was no longer just a waitress who knew about paintings. She was becoming a custodian of memory. One afternoon, Silas found her staring intently at a small, dark landscape. "That one always puzzled me," he said, his voice soft. She bought it from a flea market in Paris, paid 20 francs for it, always said it was the most important piece she ever owned. Clara pointed to a tiny, almost invisible detail in the shadowed corner of the canvas. A minuscule, crudely painted white dog, barely a few bristles of paint. "I found the entry," Clara said, her voice filled with quiet excitement. She bought it the day after her father passed away. He was a difficult man, but he loved their little terrier, Pip, she wrote. The world felt so vast and empty today. Then I saw this foolish painting, and in the corner, a tiny, ridiculous dog looking out from the darkness, and I knew that even in the bleakest landscape, there is always some small, stubborn point of loyalty. There is always a Pip. Silas was silent for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the painting. A profound sadness and a deep, abiding love seemed to emanate from him. When he finally turned to Clara, his clear blue eyes were glistening. "Thank you, Clara," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You've given her back to me." In that moment, Clara knew she was no longer an imposter. She belonged here. 3 years passed. Clara, now the Foundation's Director of Provenance and a trusted confidant to Silas, had become a formidable presence in the art world. Her work on Eleanor's Folly had culminated in a celebrated exhibition, The Collector's Heart, which received rave reviews for its innovative, narrative approach. She had earned her place not through a dramatic act, but through quiet, diligent, and deeply empathetic work. The name Julian Thorne had all but faded from her memory, a scar from a past life that no longer ached. She had heard whispers of his fate, his company's collapse, a string of failed ventures, his complete ostracization from the social and financial circles he had so desperately wanted to conquer. He was a ghost, a cautionary tale told at gallery openings. Then he reappeared. Not as a man, but as a voice. A venomous, insidious voice. He had reinvented himself as an online art critic, launching a subscription-based newsletter called The Gilded Cage. It was slick, cynical, and catered to a new generation of collectors who saw art as a volatile asset class. He championed flashy, soulless contemporary works while launching vicious, well-researched attacks on established institutions, positioning himself as a populist truth-teller, tearing down the stuffy old guard. His target, this time, was the Blackwood Foundation. Their latest acquisition, championed by Clara, was a recently discovered Renaissance portrait attributed to a lesser-known female artist, Lavinia Fontana. It was a masterpiece of quiet psychological depth, and Clara had spent a year painstakingly tracing its provenance through convent archives and obscure family letters. The Foundation had unveiled it to great acclaim. Thorne's newsletter landed like a firebomb. The headline was, "The Blackwood Foundation's Beautiful Lie." In a long, meticulously argued piece, he didn't just question the painting's authenticity. He attacked Clara personally. He never mentioned the restaurant, but he painted her as an unqualified upstart, a former service worker with a sentimental eye who had charmed an old, grieving billionaire into letting her play with his fortune. He used her own celebrated work on Eleanor's Folly against her, twisting her narrative approach into evidence of a lack of academic seriousness. He presented spectroscopic data that suggested the use of a pigment binder not commonly found in Bologna during that period. He sowed just enough doubt, wrapped in enough personal invective, to be dangerous. The art world buzzed. The story was picked up by mainstream outlets. The Foundation's board grew nervous. The painting, their new crown jewel, was suddenly under a cloud of suspicion, and Clara's reputation along with it. Silas called her into his office. The view of Central Park was obscured by a cold, driving rain. He had the newsletter printed out on his desk. "He's a cornered animal, Clara," Silas said, his voice calm. "And cornered animals are the most dangerous. He isn't attacking the painting. He's attacking you. He's trying to do to your career what he tried to do to you that night. Define you, diminish you, and break you. The data on the binder is troubling," Clara admitted, her voice tight. "It's not definitive, but it's an anomaly I can't explain." "Then find the explanation," Silas said simply. He looked at her, his faith absolute. "Eleanor used to say that every work of art has a secret it's waiting to tell, but you have to know what question to ask. You're the best I've ever seen at listening to the art. So go. Listen." For a week, Clara barely left the Foundation's conservation lab. She lived on coffee and a cold, burning determination. She wasn't just fighting for a painting, she was fighting for her own narrative. She would not be defined by Julian Thorne. She would not be the former Waitress. She was the woman who had deciphered Eleanor Blackwood's heart, and she would decipher this. She ignored the binder and focused on everything else. The canvas, the gesso, the pigments, all were period perfect. The brushwork was undeniably Fontana's. The psychological depth of the portrait was the artist's signature. So what was the secret? What was the question she wasn't asking? Exhausted, she took a walk through the Eleanor's Folly exhibit late one night. She stopped in front of the flea market landscape, the one with the little white dog. Even in the bleakest landscape, there is always some small, stubborn point of loyalty. And then it hit her. The question. It wasn't about the materials of the painting, but the life of the artist. She dove back into the archives, not looking at art history, but at social history. Lavinia Fontana was not just an artist. She was a woman, a wife, and a mother of 11 children, working in a man's world. She was the primary breadwinner for her family. Her studio was not a sacred, isolated space. It was part of her home. Clara found what she was looking for in a translated collection of household account books from 16th century Bologna. It was a footnote, a tiny, academic detail. It described the common practice of women making their own cosmetics at home. One of the most popular recipes for a facial powder, a cerise, used a binder made from egg whites and, crucially, a specific gum arabic sourced from acacia trees, a binder that was chemically distinct from the traditional oils used by most artists' guilds, a binder whose spectroscopic signature would match Thorne's anomaly. The final piece clicked into place. Clara requested high-resolution, microscopic imaging of the portrait. There, scattered across the canvas, invisible to the naked eye, were minuscule, aerosolized particles of lead carbonate, the primary ingredient in the cerise powder. The conclusion was breathtaking in its intimacy. Lavinia Fontana had been painting this masterpiece in the same room where she, or one of her daughters, or a servant, was applying makeup. The anomaly Thorne had found wasn't a forger's mistake. It was the ghost of a woman's life. It was the sound of a home, the dust of daily existence, embedded forever in a work of transcendent genius. It was proof not of a fake, but of an irrefutable, intimate authenticity. The Foundation called a press conference. Clara, standing at a podium in front of the magnificent portrait, did not refute Thorne's claims. She confirmed them. With calm, unshakable authority, she walked the assembled press and critics through her discovery. She presented the historical data, the microscopic images, and the household account books. She didn't just defend the painting, she brought its creator to life. She painted a picture of a working mother, a genius juggling domesticity and art, whose very life had become part of the fabric of her creation. Mr. Thorne's analysis was correct in its data, she concluded, her voice ringing through the silent room. But it was a failure of imagination. He looked for fraud, and so that is all he could see. He knows, as he once said, the price of everything. But he has never understood value. The true value of this painting is not in its perfect chemical composition. It is in its perfect imperfection. It is the story of a woman's life, a story he was unable and unwilling to read. It was a total vindication. Julian Thorne's credibility was not just destroyed, it was rendered irrelevant. He was exposed as a man with a spreadsheet for a soul. His newsletter folded within a month. He vanished, this time for good, not with a bang, but with the quiet whimper of a man who had tried to build a house of cards in a hurricane. That evening, Clara stood with Silas in the now empty gallery, the Lavinia Fontana glowing under the soft lights. The storm had passed. "Eleanor would have loved that," Silas said, his voice filled with pride. "You didn't just win an argument. You deepened the world's understanding of the piece. You gave the artist her life back." Clara looked at the portrait, at the woman who stared back at her across 4 centuries. She saw a kindred spirit, a woman who had insisted on her own value in a world that tried to render her invisible. She thought of the terrified girl she had been, standing in a restaurant, about to have her pockets emptied. She had been saved that night, it was true, but today she had saved herself. "She never needed me to give her life back," Clara said softly, a quiet, resolute finality in her voice. "She had it all along. We just had to learn how to see it." She turned from the painting and looked around the grand, silent room. It was not a gilded cage. It was a sanctuary, and for the first time, completely and without a single shred of doubt, she knew it was her home.